Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific car breakdown in the world of Forza 7, in particular again from the DLC pack, the most recent one, at least at the time of releasing this video, and this time we're taking a look at, for me personally, the second most interesting car of the pack. We already discussed what I would say is the most interesting, the Greenwood Corvette. It's an icon of Corvettes. Great race car. Of course, check out that review if you haven't already. This one, though, is more of a personal favourite, because with the Greenwood, pretty much everyone could appreciate it on some level, maybe even if you don't like classic Corvettes. Whereas with this one, it's much more down to personal taste, the type of vehicle that it is, the brand that it's from, the look of the car, the performance. Because, of course, Maserati has plenty of fans. They are my favourite manufacturer of cars overall. So, of course, there are those of us who love Maseratis. I personally love everything that Maserati does. I love all of their cars. But for many people who don't have that kind of love, just like you don't have love for, say, Audi or Volkswagen or Aston Martin or whatever the case may be for you personally, there are some people who just won't care that it's a Maserati, and in some ways that approach is better. Because, of course, as I always try to be, it's helpful to be as objective as possible when it comes to a review rather than subjective. You can allow personal preference and choices to come in there, because of course that's what gives you your personal flair, but you have to see past your own fandom and really assess the good and not so good points, even of cars from manufacturers who you might love. And for me that's the case with Maserati. Now this is their best-selling car ever. Already. That's pretty impressive. And the words of their own CEO were that it would have been more of a mistake to not produce the Levante. But of course the real world and a racing game are two very different things. Crossovers and SUVs are the in thing. They have been for a few years now, especially now that fuel tech, performance tech even, but especially so the practicality side of things, is coming forward so quickly, both with petrol and diesel. It makes the concept of owning a crossover or an SUV much more enticing, because gone are the days of stupidly low fuel economy and ridiculously low performance considering how much power they have. Now the engines are more responsive, they handle more like performance coupes or even sports cars sometimes. It's a much better market than it was, say, 10 to 20 years ago. To the point where you now have SUVs from Porsche and Maserati. Who would have thought that would happen anytime soon? I'm sure some people, but most of us probably not, and very few people would have that high on their wanted list. I mean, even Rolls-Royce, of course, is now looking into having their own SUV. Now, the Levante has some, I would say, pretty good points, and some which are, regardless of my fandom for the brand, not as good, for sure. Now, in real life, you have a couple of engine options. You've got the petrols and the diesels. I wish that they made a high-performance diesel, but unfortunately they don't, because for those who aren't aware, the Audi Q7 V12 TDI is one of my favourite SUVs. Of course, a diesel, one of the fastest diesels you can buy actually as well. This one has a diesel option, but that one has 270 horsepower. This one in the game, though, is the top of the tree, at least for the moment, the Levante S, and it has a very interesting choice of engine, because it's putting out pretty good power, 424, it puts out even more torque, 427 pound-feet, which for a petrol is pretty good, and that high torque, which you typically wouldn't expect from any kind of Italian performance engine, is of course primarily thanks to the aspiration. Because a few years ago this would have been maybe a turbo diesel or naturally aspirated, say 4.5 litre V8. But as I said, technology has moved on, and now it's a twin turbo 3 litre V6, which is an interesting choice. Now again, 10 years ago, you would have probably assumed maybe 350 horsepower, perhaps 400 from an engine like that. So 424 and 427 pound-feet, that's a pretty nice level to be working with. Plus the fact that it's a slightly smaller capacity makes it more rev-happy when pushed hard. 6-cylinder engines are known for sounding pretty good as well. In fact, a lot of petrol heads have the 6-cylinder engine as their favourite sounding engine. And that tends to be something that you can appreciate more in real life than in a game. Now, as I said, the car is not without its slight disadvantages, you could say. The weight, for instance, is obviously going to be much higher on an SUV or a truck or a crossover. It is here. It's 2.1 metric tons, 2,109 kilos. That's quite a bit, but at the same time, that's a lot lighter than many of its rivals. That's a whole lot lighter than most of Mercedes models. It's a lot lighter than a Cayenne, a whole lot lighter than a Range Rover, that's for sure. And consequently, the horsepower per ton is still actually over 200. It's 201. And that's actually not bad at all for such a heavy car. That's similar to, say, a hot hatch, which, when you put it into that perspective, that's not too bad for something that's almost as heavy as a Bentley. Now, the pricing is quite high, 145 grand, but at the same time, of course, you don't actually have to pay anything for it. When you download the DLC, you get them all for free anyway. But even if you did have to, 145 grand isn't too bad. It's a much newer vehicle. It's in a category of vehicles which are basically all expensive. The Q7 V12 TDI, even though it's come down over the years, it's still not a cheap car in the Forza franchise. These kind of ultra exclusive, ultra high performance crossovers, or sometimes full SUVs, they are very expensive in games, in the real world. Now, to get to the ultimate thing, which I would say is the downside of the Levante, at least when it's stock, and that is the key thing to bear in mind, is actually the handling, and in particular the fact that the torque distribution on the Levante is very, very heavily inclined toward the front end. And although that may not sound like a bad thing, it has the result of being very heavy over that front axle, almost like a front-wheel drive car. Now, as I said, that is stock, and when you tune the car, you can definitely change that. With the diff and the torque split, that kind of stuff, you can make a huge difference to how a car like this will perform. So it's not really a long-term issue, and if you do loosen it up a little bit, send a bit more to the back end rather than the front, those kind of problem-solving methods work wonders with a car like this, because another big advantage that the Levante has is, although it's a big car and a heavy one, it's not obscenely big. It's actually quite manageable in size compared to some of its rivals, such as the Q7. It's not a ridiculously huge SUV, it's very much so a sports crossover. It feels like that. It's a great rival to stuff like the Porsche Macan or the BMW X6M, those kind of slightly smaller but still very fast choices of SUV. Personally, I love to see this car in the game. I was hoping that either Gran Turismo or Forza would get the Levante. To be honest, I'm not surprised that Forza got it first. We don't have Maserati, of course, in Gran Turismo at the moment, but I still hope that they bring it back as well. And this would be a perfect way to start. The Levante on Forza 7, great car, that's my verdict, but to get the best out of it, you definitely do need to tune it. This is not the kind of SUV which I'd recommend racing stock, even against other stock SUVs, because there are many other ones that can outmaneuver it, especially on tight, low-speed corners. But with tuning, it's got a ton of potential. So overall, I'm very happy to see it in the game, and that's it. So, of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.